Our story begins with a strange family living on the outskirts of the kingdom of Diller. Lloyd Bland was a husband, and 3 other women were part of the household. Eyeballs was the first of them, though in reality, she was a terrifying dragon queen. The second woman was Alice, the family's eldest daughter and the daughter of the Demon King, whom Lloyd had slain. Lastly, there was Sophia, the Witch of Calamity, a gifted sorceress and the family's second daughter. This was the family that a god had falsely created. Today, we will uncover the history of this fantastic and bizarre family. It all began when Lloyd triumphed over the Demon King in an epic battle. Covered in blood, he received honors for being a formidable and skillful warrior. He had defeated the Demon King's entire army, 1,000 strong, with just one hand. It was said that Lloyd possessed a power not found in humankind, a strength that rivaled, if not surpassed, that of the gods. According to the Demon King, Lloyd would have nowhere to go after defeating him and would eventually lose all sense of purpose. At that point, people would begin to fear him, seeing him as a major threat to the world. As a result, the Demon King demanded that Lloyd be killed, claiming that it would be the only proper end for a great and valiant warrior. Without hesitation, Lloyd prepared to deliver the final blow. The Demon King warned that Lloyd's chosen path would ultimately lead to his own death, but Lloyd was unmoved. He bid the Demon King Duke farewell and responded to his ominous remarks. In turn, the Duke also said his final goodbye to the brave Lloyd, ultimately losing his life at his hands. 2 girls witnessed the Demon King's death. One of them was a princess, the Demon King's daughter. She had personally watched Lloyd kill her father. Her guardian stepped forward to warn her not to get too close, in case the warrior noticed them. She was the last hope for her people, the only one left after the Demon King and his army had been wiped out. She had to remain strong. The princess vowed that one day she would find Lloyd and take her revenge. She watched him walk away from the battlefield, the man who had slain her father. Half a year later, in the kingdom of Diller, the people in the royal palace were celebrating the protagonist, the brave and noble warrior who had saved the country. They praised him as wonderful, marveling at how a man from poverty had risen to greatness. The girls in the palace whispered among themselves, wondering whether he had a partner, and hoping they might become his wife. Lloyd stood before the king and greeted him. The king congratulated him on defeating the Demon King and asked him to raise his head. He inquired whether the battle had been a great success. Lloyd agreed and said it was an honor to receive such praise for fulfilling his duty. With the king's support and the kindness of the rewards bestowed upon him, Lloyd was able to fully recover from the brutal fight. The king remarked that the rewards were merely the least they could offer a hero who had saved the nation. Then, the king explained the real reason he had summoned Lloyd to the palace. He wanted to grant him a portion of royal territory. Lloyd was confused. The king continued, declaring in his own name that he would grant the brave Lloyd the title of Earl of the Borderlands. The entire palace applauded the birth of a new earl. Amid the celebration, Lloyd revealed a darker twist to the unfolding story. He had been gifted a mansion, an amazing gesture, but it came with grim news from the east of Roa. A recent development had shaken the region. Terrifying monsters had overrun the once thriving iron mines. Determined to regain control, the monarch had sent a powerful army to neutralize the threat, but none of the soldiers returned. The mission was a complete failure, with his forces dwindling. The king turned to Lloyd for strategic leadership to resolve the crisis and eliminate the terrifying creatures. This shifted the story's focus to a new and dangerous journey, introducing side stories with larger implications that demanded Lloyd's involvement. It was going to be a thrilling and perilous adventure, especially with the looming threat of formidable enemies east of Roa. Lloyd agreed to the task. But as soon as he left the palace, those around the king began to worry. The territory granted to Lloyd was in the borderlands, where crops barely grew. If Lloyd discovered that it was just a lifeless wasteland, he might protest. But the king insisted that wouldn't happen, because Lloyd never asked for anything. As long as he was alive, he would be content. However, it was precisely in those lands that the great Dragon King lived, an immortal being capable of destroying an entire country in a single night. Not even the Demon King had dared challenge the Dragon Queen, who was considered the true supremacist of the dragon race. The king knew that even Lloyd likely stood no chance. The king's advisor was shocked. Was the monarch trying to send his own hero to his death? The king admitted as much. He confessed that from the beginning, he had only intended for the great hero and the demon king to destroy each other. But Lloyd had proved too powerful. And in the king's eyes, the world did not need that kind of power. His plan to eliminate the warrior who had the power to both save and destroy the world was nearing its end. Still, the king had not given up on the idea of Lloyd's death, especially now that the great hero was no longer of use to him. So, a month later in the suburbs of Rhea, Lloyd was traveling in a carriage. He realized that he had probably been quietly expelled from his own country. As he observed the landscape, he noticed there were barely any plants in the territory and began to wonder if this lifeless land was really where the great monster lived, or would eventually appear. But as expected, the king had feared him and had ultimately sent him to this empty, barren place. It didn't come as a surprise. If he were the king, he probably would have done the same. This realization made Lloyd reflect that everything happening now was simply the result of his past choices. He remembered the day he applied to participate in the body modification experiment to become a powerful soldier. Lloyd's parents had died early, and no matter where he went, he was always treated like a problem child. When he realized that the world no longer needed him, his desire to search for meaning in it disappeared. Still, he volunteered that day to become a test subject, simply because he wanted to be needed by someone. In the end, the scientists succeeded in conducting their experiments on Lloyd. From that day on, he became not only a great exterminator, but a true warrior for his country. The scientists didn't care much about what he would become. To them, it was just a big experiment that happened to succeed. Even after accounting for several flaws, the king was finally satisfied with what had been created using Lloyd's body. Later, Lloyd was able to defeat the Demon King. But with that victory, he also lost his reason for existing. He had been given too much power, and now he had been discarded as an unnecessary existence. It made him question whether there was any reason to keep on living. Soon after, a loud noise rang out behind him. When he looked back, the driver was shocked to find that Lloyd had disappeared, because he had continued his journey at an incredible speed. Meanwhile, on Mount Rodboor, inside a tunnel, Lloyd had brought some light equipment from the city, so he could explore the area and face any monsters with less trouble. Still, he was curious about what kind of monster lived in a place as vast as that. As Lloyd entered the mines, a huge dragon appeared, demanding to know why he had trespassed into its territory. The dragon introduced himself as the Great Dragon King and threatened Lloyd for provoking him in such an outrageous way. Lloyd noted to himself how massive the creature was, and wondered how something so large ended up in a place like that. The Dragon King pressed him again for an answer, asking if the human was too scared to speak. Lloyd calmly replied that he had forgotten what fear meant a long time ago. He informed the Dragon King that the mountain didn't actually belong to him. It was part of King Deleager's territory, and now Lloyd had legal rights to it. The dragon was a little surprised that this human wasn't afraid of him. He told Lloyd that if he valued his life, he should turn back immediately. But Lloyd refused, saying that he was acting under direct orders from the king of the land. The dragon laughed and commented that Lloyd was interesting. So interesting, in fact, that he'd give him a gift. He launched a fiery attack directly at Lloyd's head without hesitation. But nothing happened. The flames had no effect. The Dragon King was stunned. Lloyd explained that he was currently using protective energy barrier, which impressed the dragon even more. The protagonist apologized, saying he was a rather special being. His body had been broken from the start. Still trying to defeat him, the Dragon King decided to use his physical strength to end the battle, since his fire powers had failed. But Lloyd blocked the attack without hesitation. The Dragon King was more and more astonished, and asked if Lloyd was really human. Lloyd simply replied that he was no longer the human he once was. Lloyd then insisted that they drop the pointless conversation. He didn't even need his sword. He lunged at the Dragon King with only his fists, delivering a flurry of relentless punches. The dragon was sent flying and crashed into the wall of the great iron mine. After being pummeled like that, the dragon began to tremble in fear and disbelief. Lloyd recognized that look. It was the same expression of shock and terror he had seen countless times before. He asked the Dragon King if he intended to leave the area for good. If he left peacefully, Lloyd said there would be no need to come looking for him again. But the Dragon King refused to surrender to a human and demanded that Lloyd kill him. Lloyd, however, questioned why the dragon wasn't fighting seriously. All the attacks so far, fire and tail strikes, were easily avoidable or deflectable, especially outside of the mine. That's when Lloyd realized the truth. The Dragon King didn't actually want to kill him. To put it bluntly, the dragon was only trying to scare people away from his territory, not destroy them. The Dragon King hesitated and replied that the protagonist was delirious. He insisted that Lloyd should take his life once and for all. But instead, Lloyd turned around and said that the king had ordered him to kill the monster so that there would be no more losses. Considering that the dragon had not caused any damage or loss to the kingdom, that order could no longer be carried out and was without reason. The Dragon King cried out, not understanding why Lloyd hadn't just killed him outright, especially since he was aware that, for humans, a dragon's body was equivalent to a great deal of treasure. He asked if that wasn't what Lloyd himself should want at all costs, like the other humans. Lloyd agreed, because with the dragon's body, he could indeed get enough money to buy a country. But he didn't care about those things. After all, he had killed enough, and that was why he did not want to cause any more unnecessary deaths with his blood-drenched hands. The Dragon King became interested and asked what had happened to him to make him think that way. Lloyd told him that he was a warrior, and on the king's orders, he had faced and defeated the Demon King's army single-handedly. He was now considered a threat to all of humanity. Lloyd himself was aware that the order to kill the Dragon King was just another way for the king to get him to kill another powerful being, so they could get rid of him. The Dragon King asked why he had accepted the order if he had known all along. The protagonist replied that it was because he had nothing, not even love or family. All he had was that power. Lloyd knew that if he wasn't the weapon they needed, then there was no reason for him to continue living, and that was something he hated deeply. Lloyd decided to leave the iron mine and said the dragon could stay there if it wanted to. He said goodbye and added that he couldn't care less what the Dragon King did with his life from then on. But then, suddenly, a great light came from behind him, and the dragon's voice told him to wait. When Lloyd turned around to see what had happened, he realized a girl had appeared, claiming to have a suggestion. She introduced herself as Is. Lloyd was surprised to see that the dragon had turned into a girl. Is asked for the protagonist's name, and when she found out it was Lloyd, she asked him to live with her from then on. After hearing that strange request, Lloyd just stared at Is and left her confused with that look. She commented that it was probably because he was enchanted by her beauty and knew that males could never resist her attractive looks. But Lloyd denied it and said he was just thinking he understood how such a huge dragon ended up inside the iron mine and how she was able to change shape. His doubts were now cleared up. Is was shocked and asked if he didn't feel anything for her, any spark of attraction or a burst of emotion like men normally felt. This made the protagonist lie, saying that maybe he did. She immediately realized, however, that he was feeling literally nothing for her. Is couldn't believe that all her beauty was not being appreciated and realized that not even that could move the heart of that brave warrior. Leaving that aside, Lloyd asked her what she meant about living together. Is commented on his words, mentioning that he did not have a family, and she ended up embarrassed to say it directly again. This made Lloyd give up asking and just walk away, but she held him back and said she wanted to become his partner. The protagonist accepted without even thinking twice, leaving her surprised because he was such a simple person. She insisted that she wanted to become his partner for real, and if he didn't even understand what that meant, Lloyd confirmed that they had become husband and wife. Is insisted that, according to the ancient legends of dragons, those who had the grace to help them needed to receive the fidelity of the dragon they helped, or even become that dragon's partner. Lloyd did not mind too much and said it was fine, telling her that there was a mansion nearby, and it would be fine if they lived there from then on. But Is asked him to wait a while because, before the protagonist made his decision, she at least wanted to tell him about her life story and her old tales. She said that a long time ago, dragons used to live in that land. One day, she came across a human who had fainted and decided to help him out of kindness. the person she helped recovered afterward, and became unafraid of dragons. He thanked her for her help. What's more, he offered that they could become great friends. So, she ended up going to visit the country of the human who welcomed them, and temporarily, peace and friendship were established between the two races. They lived looking after each other's countries, protecting the human caravans, and the country started to become more and more prosperous and peaceful. The days went by quickly. Then, one day, as usual, the humans gave the dragons the minerals they loved so much. As usual, the dragons ate those minerals. Eventually, the dragon's consciousness disappeared. When it opened its eyes again, its entire species had been killed. After the humans achieved peace and prosperity, they no longer needed the dragon protection and decided to poison them to kill every last one of them. So, the land they used to live on, all their flesh and blood, became the property of the humans. But those were troubled and difficult memories that she did not quite remember. As she recalled her senses, everything around her had gone up in flames after she had gone mad with rage. Of those times, she only wondered whether the plan to kill all the dragons was something ordinary people had been aware of from the start, or not. Perhaps, in the end, the children involved in that slaughter hadn't even been aware or guilty of what they had been part of. So, the fire consumed and burned the entire forest. Now, those lands were just the one they were standing on, vague and lifeless. Since then, she has come to be known as the Cruel Dragon King. Her great crime was to allow her people to die, which also involved those who were not directly related to her. To punish herself, she secluded herself inside to live a solitary life of redemption. An enormous amount of time passed, and throughout all that time, Aias had always wondered what fate had in store for her. She hoped that someone would be born with enough power to kill her, and yet Lloyd himself chose to spare her life. She confessed that she was also tired of punishing herself in isolation, so she wanted to ask the brave warrior Lloyd, who had killed and frightened many people, living like her in solitude, if they could at least live together now that he had decided not to kill her once again. Lloyd just agreed without even thinking twice about her question, leaving Aias in shock because he was always such a simple person. She asked him if he had thought seriously after hearing her story, which made the protagonist mention that, for whatever reason, fulfilling the wishes made to him was his only reason for living. If it was what Aias needed, he would strive with his own life to fulfill her will. Lloyd ended up calling her his wife, which made Aias cry with emotion and call him husband too. But leaving the emotional part aside, in a matter of seconds, the protagonist commented on how Aias changed her personality so quickly from when she was a dragon to her human form. Now she replied that she was only pretending to try to scare him away. Considering that she had been isolated and alone for so long, it was expected that she would be a bit antisocial and wouldn't know how to interact properly with people. Lloyd decided to accept her answer and told her to leave, but before he told her where to go, he simply held Aias on his lap and ran out of the iron mines with her at a frightening speed. She asked where he was going, but soon Lloyd told her that they were arriving at their new home, which surprised her because it was a huge place. The protagonist said that they should choose a room to stay in and started calling her Aias as his new nickname. But Aias complained that Lloyd always had an expressionless face and asked if he couldn't express a little more affection from time to time. But in any case, she was content for the time being, because now they would be husband and wife, and he would need to make her smile a lot more from now on. Later, in the bedroom of Lloyd's mansion, he stopped to rest, thinking that it had been a long day. He couldn't believe that he was now having a family and wondered if that was his new reason for living. Thinking more about the term family, he remembered someone he hadn't been able to protect in the past, someone who was like a loved one to him. He wondered if he really deserved something like that now. Suddenly, Aias appeared in Lloyd's room, suggesting that they sleep together that night. Of course, the protagonist agreed without even thinking twice. Aias was embarrassed and asked him to be very, very gentle with her. The scene cuts to the next morning. While Lloyd was washing his face, he noticed that Aias was in a bad mood and asked her why she was making so much noise so early. This made her start shouting at him because Lloyd was such an idiot that, even though that was their first night together sleeping in the same bed, he just went to sleep immediately after lying down and did not do anything with her. This made her question his masculinity. The protagonist replied that he couldn't imagine that they were able to sleep together and couldn't complain about it because the bed was not big enough for both of them to lie down together, which only made Ayas even angrier because he was thinking all the wrong things. She told him that she was not complaining about the bed, but about him. Ayas said she had done all the dressing up, but in the end, Lloyd did not do anything, which made the protagonist apologize and ask her what exactly she wanted him to do. He asked her to tell him directly. Ayas got embarrassed and started talking indirectly about what a husband and wife normally did together, which was mating. Lloyd kept thinking about the term she used and made Ayas embarrassed again, making her ask him if he didn't happen to know what it was. He replied that he did, but commented that it was something that only happened when a couple loved each other. This made him ask if Ayas loved him, which made her feel ashamed. She deflected the subject by saying that it was something only humans thought about, because she didn't know that there had to be love involved for it to happen. Lloyd said that if it was still what she wanted, it was his role as her husband to fulfill her wishes, and commented that they could do it right away. This left Aya shocked and ashamed again, so she flew off. She said that since her partner had decided to become loyal to the dragons, she would become loyal to the humans about mating, and that they did not need to do anything until they fell in love with each other. Since Ayas was the one who suggested it, Lloyd just went along with it. She decided to go out and prepare some food, knowing that it was something wives should normally do. That conversation made the protagonist think that being a husband was even more difficult than facing the Demon King, because there were several steps and obstacles to overcome. Later, Ayas returned to the house with something in her arms, leaving Lloyd at a loss to understand what exactly she had brought. She explained that it was her favorite mineral and also a chicken that was in the area. She suggested that they could eat it that day. The protagonist eats the mineral and says that he couldn't sustain himself on it, which surprises her because she did not know that humans did not eat minerals. So Aya suggests that he eat the chicken's fresh meat, which makes Lloyd comment that it was undercooked. She decides to leave the food in a better state for her husband to eat and roast the meat with her fire powers until it is black as coal. She celebrates because now he should be able to eat perfectly and without any problems. Lloyd says it tastes good now, and Ayas decides to eat it too, only for her to complain that it tastes terrible. But the protagonist insists that it tastes good because she had made it for him herself, and that was enough to make it delicious, even though he was not able to eat the minerals she ate. Ayas is embarrassed and wonders if Lloyd is a bit of a delicate person, and worries if she could just let a person like him eat what she has made that tastes so awful. She realizes that, as a wife, her pride would not allow her to let Lloyd keep eating something bad until she could truly satisfy her husband with her cooking. Ayas then asks what was missing to make it tastier, and he replies that it was salt, which makes her realize that she had left out the spices. After discovering that he could get spices like that in town, 2 days' drive away, she asks him to wait for her for a few minutes because she was going out to get some salt. Lloyd tells her that she needs money to buy things and asks if she even has any, which makes her hesitate. He continues to ask if she has any experience buying things before, which again makes her nervous. Finally, she asks her husband to accompany her shopping. Lloyd agrees because there was also something he needed to do in town, and now that he was prepared, they could go, but she quickly stops him from going into town, carrying such a sword around his waist. The protagonist insists that they could be attacked by thieves on the way, and that they'd better be careful. Ayas replies that if they had to, just his normal monster power would be enough, which makes her sigh, wondering how he could be so silly. Ayas comments that, besides, there would not be any thieves along the way, especially since they traveled the city while she was in her dragon form. So the couple decides to head into town to do some shopping. Eventually, the two arrive in Ian's town, which prompts the protagonist to say that they should get off somewhere where the townspeople can't see them, like near the forest. After getting off and arriving in the city, Ayas is impressed by how the human world has developed and ends up going straight to the first butcher's shop she sees and starts eating the meat that was on sale. This causes the salesman to go into shock and ask for the money for the product she was eating. Lloyd apologizes to the owner and pays for the meat she ate, saying that his wife was a bit strange, which leaves Ayas shaken because she couldn't believe that someone like Lloyd called her strange when he was much stranger than she was. The protagonist explains that humans had rules when it came to buying things, and for that, she needed to pay first. This makes her apologize because she had never bought anything before, but Lloyd just decides to put that incident aside and says that they should buy what they needed, do the work he needed to do in town, and go home. Ayas draws his attention to going for a walk in the city, and the two end up in a clothes store, which she is delighted to see because her husband was always a very sensitive person. She decides to drag him along to do some shopping. Aya starts looking at the clothes in the store, and a saleswoman appears in a matter of seconds to attend to them. But Ayas ignores her and just decides to pick out some clothes that were pretty and asks Lloyd what he thought would look good on her. But as he just agreed with everything she was saying, Ayas gets annoyed and asks if he was really paying attention because he was reacting in the same way to everything she showed him. The protagonist insists that he was being sincere, which makes Ayas decide to try on one of the garments. This makes the saleswoman want to show her even more clothes, but Ayas refuses, saying that she did not need to. Lloyd is surprised that she would not want to buy the clothes, and she explains that her clothes were made of energy and that she did not need to buy them. She could just memorize what they look like and recreate each one on her body. This makes Lloyd comment that the Dragon Queen, the head of the dragon race, was surprisingly miserly, which makes Ayas complain that she was only economical. He just agrees without much hesitation. The couple decides to continue walking around the city on a sort of date until they finish shopping in town. Then they both stop at a nearby restaurant to eat, which makes Ayas anxious because she wants to be able to learn more about human cuisine. When she tries a plate of roast chicken, she is impressed by how tasty it is, a meat that was well roasted with lots of well-placed spices, and realizes that Lloyd praised the food too, even though he always kept the same expression when he ate anything. Ayas thinks that would be a bit difficult to replicate and wonders how she could learn to cook so perfectly. She hears a couple next door feeding each other, which makes her excited, and she decides to replicate the same with Lloyd, wanting to feed him with her own fork. But the protagonist does not understand anything and replies that he was just fine eating on his own and did not need any help, leaving her shaken, and Lloyd not understanding why she was acting strangely the whole time they were in town together. Aya starts to think that maybe she was just setting high expectations, and maybe Lloyd was actually bored being around her, because after all, there were only a couple of names, and there was no affection between them. Lloyd asks if she is all right, and Ayas agrees, saying she just got a bit tired. Until suddenly, in the middle of the conversation, a customer starts shouting at the restaurant staff, complaining that they're serving cheap wine and taking it as an insult. The customer becomes so angry that he punches the employee and holds the employee's wife, throwing a bottle of wine at the employee's head without caring. The customer says that he would forgive the employee if he gave him all the money and his own wife. Of course, the employee refuses, which makes the customer want to hit him with the gun that was in his hands. But soon Lloyd appears to prevent a murder scene from happening. The customer is shocked and asks why he intervened. The protagonist replies that it was simply because he heard someone calling for help and obviously he would come to save whoever was in need. The protagonist holds the client's gun so tightly that it starts to break with his bare hands, leaving the man in shock. Then he orders his men to go after Lloyd, who is clearly facing a gang of thugs. When Ayas realizes that a fight is about to break out, she asks him to be careful not to accidentally destroy the restaurant. So when the thugs throw blades in his direction, he simply holds them up as if they were sheets of paper, stating that guns were forbidden because they would end up causing damage to the store. Lloyd treats the blades as if they were nothing, still saying that it was dangerous and they should leave it alone so that no one would get hurt. Soon the bandits end up falling to the ground in shock because the protagonist was simply monstrous. The man who was still holding the waitress hostage tells him not to come any closer or he'll harm the hostage, but Lloyd does not care one bit and simply punches a guy in the face, sending him flying away and out of the restaurant, leaving all the other customers in shock at what they were seeing. At this, the protagonist confirms that he completed his mission perfectly and the restaurant was in perfect condition without being destroyed, which makes everyone around celebrate because he was super strong and cool with his skills. Ayas gasps because Lloyd was her husband, but soon some guards come running in, telling them that they receive a report that some soldiers have appeared there and ask if everyone is all right. The protagonist tells him what happened and hands over the men he defeated like sacks of potatoes to the soldiers, leaving them surprised because Lloyd defeated them all. The soldiers then ask for the protagonist's name so they can find out exactly what happened, and he reveals that it was Lloyd Blanc, leaving everyone in shock because they all knew the name of the one who defeated the Demon King. The soldiers practically worshipped the protagonist because they were hands of his, and it was an honor to be in front of the great hero. But Lloyd does not care much and just tells him to give the mission accomplished report sheet to the king because he completed the task he received earlier involving the dragon. Just then, more and more people start showing up inside the restaurant just to see the great hero and celebrate, which makes IS say that they should leave. But the protagonist mentions that they couldn't leave because it was too crowded at the door for them to leave. The employees who were saved help the protagonist out the back door, and IS thanks them by asking if they're okay. The employee agrees because he was used to dealing with that kind of thing, but still want to be able to thank them for their help earlier. Lloyd says that the next time they see thugs like that, they should not get too involved because he was clearly a weak person who would only end up getting hurt, which makes IS angry because the protagonist was a bit cold in his words. But the employee replies that he only ended up acting out of emotion when he was worried that something might happen to his beloved wife, and that worry hurt more than any wound. This ends up making the protagonist reflect on his words. But IS soon says that they should go back at once because they were wasting too much time there. But before they go, the employee's wife presents them with some food. At the end of the day, IS comments that a lot had happened that day, and yet it was only the second day since they had become husband and wife. Thinking about it, she thinks about how that couple in the restaurant weren't just a couple in name, but were actually a real couple with affection involved, which makes her a little jealous. Suddenly, Lloyd simply puts a snack in her mouth, and she does not understand why, despite it being a tasty snack. It was very sudden. The protagonist explains that he only did it intuitively because she had opened her mouth and said, "Ah," when she sighed. IS is surprised that he would do something like that just for the hell of it, and Lloyd tells her that he just ended up forgetting that it was something couples used to do. Even though they were only a couple in name, he still wanted to be able to act like a real couple. This makes IS laugh, thinking that she was being a fool to worry because it was not just her, but Lloyd himself was trying, in his own way, to act like a real couple.